What do professional tenants in this day and age want from a property?
They are thinking of these as longer term places that they're going to live. So obviously their expectations and their relationship with the management company is more important than perhaps it used to be.
Landlords who sort of fail to reinvest back into their property over time, your property gets less competitive.
I do viewings myself and think, I couldn't live here. I'd say that one thing across the board that probably doesn't enter a landlord's mind is...
Hi, it's Tom from Source Investments. In this video, we're going to talk through what makes a high-performing buy-to-let. I'm joined in this video by Source's Managing Director, Ollie Smith, and I'm also joined by Choinski, who has overseen herself over 1,000 tenants who have moved into property. She manages our lettings and management company. And I think the really interesting thing with having you on, Amber, is all of the insight that you can give us, having overseen the portfolios for so many landlords over the years for us, and obviously managing so many properties. And like I said, you know, you've overseen the check-in of over 1,000 tenancies. There's a lot of knowledge and insight there that you can feed back to the rest of the company at Source Investors when it comes to us speaking to new clients who are asking us, where should I invest? What should I buy? I think the first thing to mention, we see a lot of investors who are looking at property and are not really thinking about what the tenants want. It's that mindset of understanding, like, what do professional tenants in this day and age want from a property? It's a pretty good place for an investor to start thinking from, rather than their own personal preferences they might have. Start thinking about what are the ingredients that is going to make a property really in demand from a tenant.
I'd say there was probably a shift after COVID, and one thing that became very important to people was co-working spaces or somewhere in a property that they could have a desk set up. I think prior to 2020, that probably wasn't as important to people. It wasn't the norm to work from home. And if you did, it was a luxury and they probably did it from their sofa. So I'd say that that's one big thing. Another thing that I think is also off the back of COVID is outside spaces. So obviously in the pandemic, when everybody was locked in their flats and they didn't have any balconies and they couldn't cool their houses down, as we had that heat wave in March that one year. Those two are probably big new ones, alongside the general, you know, they want it to be a nice clean space. They want it to be well maintained in a good location for whatever that means for them, whether they're a student, they need it near their uni, or they commute into London, so it needs to have good rail links, whatever their position is. I think those are probably the big ones. Getting into the actual properties, I'd say that one thing across the board that probably doesn't enter a landlord's mind is storage. A lot of, for example, one-bed flats are made with just simply a bathroom, a kitchen, living room, and a bedroom, and there's nowhere for them to put their stuff. So I'd say that that's something that I'd say probably in the last couple of years, developers have caught on to that. There is generally a lot more storage in the new builds that I'm seeing now, but a couple of years prior to that, there really wasn't any at all. That I do viewings myself and think, I couldn't live here. Where would I put my stuff? So I think it is looking at it from a perspective of how would this property feel if I was to live here, rather than how do the numbers feel on this property that I'm trying to buy. I think it's looking at both sides of it. Obviously, both sides are equally as important, and not having a personal preference. So I've also seen rental properties that landlords decided to get pink or yellow kitchens, which isn't going to be to everybody's taste, and in turn will make them more difficult to rent and devalue them. So just thinking about it from the tenant side a little bit more rather than your own side and the numbers side is definitely important.
What tenants, professional tenants, want these days is very different to 10, 15, 20 years ago. Tenants in the day, they are the customer.
That's a really important point that we've spoken about before in terms of landlords buying with personal preferences. They've got to remember that these are investments. I think this really highlights the point of a professional management service, someone who actually really understands what they're doing, where even when a landlord's looking at it in the first place and speaking to us on the investment side, but then really thinking about who's going to live there. Your personal preference does not matter. It's whoever's going to live in this property.
I think as well, like, you know, professional tenants now, they're willing to pay the money to be in nice places. So that's, you know, that at that higher end of the market, it's more competitive now, you know, and I think, like I said, you know, especially when you go out of London into some of the other cities that we work in, you know, Sheffield, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, we've always tried to choose that make that higher quality decision, get into that higher quality accommodation. And most of the time that's paid us back in a huge amount of demand, because these young professional tenants, they want to pay for a nice place.
I actually think that the market is changing a little bit, and house prices are obviously, certainly if we're talking about London, but also in other major cities, Manchester, for example, prices are becoming quite unattainable for quite a lot of people. And I think that young professionals are residing to the fact that they're perhaps going to be renting for longer. They're not necessarily just trying to rent a property for a period of time and then they're like, right, and I'll be out in 5 years and I'll buy my property. I think they are tuning into the fact that I don't know how achievable it is for me to buy a property in the next 5 years. So when I'm renting,
or is it worth it?
Or is it worth it? Renting. People have different views on this, but renting itself as an asset, the freedom that you sometimes have versus owning property, that's a whole nother topic. But I think that the point I'm making is tenants that are going into these properties, they're not viewing it so short term anymore. I think they are thinking of these as longer term places that they're going to live. So obviously their expectations of what they need to see from that property and their relationship with the management company is more important than perhaps it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think on the other side of that, you've obviously got to think about, from the landlord's perspective, what makes a really high performing buy to let is the way that you look at reinvesting and maintaining your property over time. Landlords who sort of fail to reinvest back into their property, keep it maintained and compliant, or even fail to get a proper management company in place, that's where over time your property gets less competitive. You see less tenant demand. So if we're talking about, what makes a really strong, high performing buy to let, part of that is the ongoing mindset and management of that property.
Mm-hmm.
And on that point, you can have, I'm sure Amber will agree with me, you can have two exactly the same properties and you can have two different landlords, two different letting agents or two different approaches, even though the exact same apartment. In this example, you can have two completely different outcomes. I think it just goes to show that this is about, also like any business, how well run it is going to dictate how successful it is. So I think it's all the things we've mentioned there in terms of getting all the right ingredients and thinking about the tenant first rather than your own preferences, getting all those ingredients that we think is going to drive tenant demand, and then start thinking about how you're going to run it really, really well. And obviously our advice would be to get a top-notch letting and management company in who know what they're doing to help you run that. So Amber, coming back to the original question, what are the three biggest things you think are the most important that make a high-performing buy-to-let property?
If I had to pick out three, I would say the first one is always the obvious one to everybody, is location. Location is very important. Obviously, if you pick the wrong location, there's no tenants around and the property's not going to rent. If you pick a lower quality area, then you're going to get lower quality tenants, which can affect the rental rates. Secondly, I would say the mindset. So like we've discussed, treating it as a business, reinvesting your money into the property, making sure that you're not choosing from personal preference. And thirdly, bringing on a professional agent, making sure that you've got the right management company that works for you, that manages the property compliantly, but also to your taste, and is giving the tenants, again, a good experience.
Well, thank you, Amber. That was really interesting. Thank you for your insights and being here today. If you are a landlord and you're looking for some more advice on your buy-to-let portfolio, whether it's buying a new investment or it's help with letting and managing your existing portfolio, click the link below and speak to a member of the team.